why people with high IQs have lower common sense. And
Yeah.
you sent me a paper, but I couldn't access it because my university didn't allow it.
Oh, that's sad. That's sad. I also didn't read it super extensively, so I'll just caveat with that. But I enjoy the premise. You know what I do like? I like when I find like academic papers or research articles that point to something that most people assume to be true, and we don't ever, well, we don't usually have evidence for it. Like I've heard so many people say that, I went to a grammar school, for example, and the notion of my taxi drivers that I used to like go to school with, and back used to say like, oh, but most of the kids here don't have any common sense, and I agree with them. I don't have loads of common sense. I'm very impractical, like, and there's a lot of things in the sort of, I don't know, in domestic life that I'm really shit at. I'm not saying that I have a ridiculously high IQ, but what I'm saying, like, I went to that same grammar school and I followed that same theme of like, yeah, smarter people have less sort of worldly knowledge and common sense. And then I found that paper, and it's just interesting, yeah, when something in the academic world points to something that in most mundane environments people assume to be true.
I thought
And
you
if I
got I thought you
go
got
on.
quite good domestic knowledge. Like, what's wrong with your domestic knowledge? It's better than mine. I can barely cook.
Yeah, but that's not. I mean, that's cooking, yes, but that's because I've had to do that because I wanted to like eat well, and Mum made an effort when I just before I left home to like teach me some basic like food principles and stuff. But it's more like if you ask me, "Oh, Joel, can you like put up some shelves and or like change a or like pump up a car tire or like or basic things like tell me how to get from this place to this place on public transport in London." I'm a bit like, whoa, I don't. That's just a bit mad. Not saying that those specific things are like what common sense means, but I think it's the fact that I can talk a big game on a podcast and like yap about philosophy and psychology and shit, and that sounds like quite, I don't know, sophisticated, or whatever. But then when it comes to like worldly things, I'm still 20 years old and have no clue. I mean, I've still not done much in the world at all. I don't know how things work. I wouldn't know. I don't know how to pay tax. I don't know how to apply for a mortgage on a house. I don't know this normal human stuff. This what's considered common sense. Well, I'm just a weird kid that likes reading books and stuff. But anyway, this paper, the reason I think they based the headline on the idea that when people get more and more, when they develop more and more expertise in a specific field, that narrows their worldview. It's kind of like what you talked about in a way that knowledge can blind us in a way. It's like the more they get consumed by their discipline, their academic discipline, the less they are sort of being aware of those of things. I don't know, things more regular, knowledge and wisdom that's more regular. They get so sort of refined and amazing at the thing that they're good at because they're the top of their field in it. But in some way, they've then invested less time in developing like common sense skills and things like this. And also that there's a level of ignorance based on egotism and narcissism in that somebody who feels like they're intellectually superior will then not take the time to learn or to pick up common sense principles because they can just rely on their academic pursuit. It was interesting. As I say, I didn't read it like comprehensively, but it's interesting. And also, did I tell you this as well on that same line? And I found that study. I wasn't seeking out that study. I found that study looking into IQ for an essay at uni, and I found another study that found that people with a high IQ are more likely to experience suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation than people with a lower IQ, which was interesting. That relationship was quite clear. It's not like a guaranteed thing, but it's like a higher IQ person is more likely to feel suicidal than a lower IQ person, which you can allow you and the people out there to sort of apply whatever perspective on that you like. But it's just an interesting discovery, I think.
Yeah, for the IQ suicidal thing, I think it's because being kind of being at the bottom is like ignorance is bliss, and being at the top, maybe you have a more fruition of your ideas that comes into reality that you like. I feel like it's this sort of upper middle part that's really tough, where you're between the worst of both worlds, and I can it. I guess it would be strange of why would that be a thing? Is it just people kind of thinking their ways out of emotions and things like that? That would be what comes to mind for me. The other thing you said about common sense, I think there's a big category of people that have this thing of when they're interested in something, they obsess. When they're not interested in something, they don't care. And it's a little bit like me. Like, I think I'm in that category in that you can hit me with a line and I will spiral my thoughts for an hour, but I won't have what's a common sense thing I'm not very good at.
Like when you put frozen chicken wraps in the oven and thought they'd be alright.
Yeah, there's a lot of cooking examples. The other day,
what was he putting in the oven? Just like beef mince or something?
Yeah. The internet bullied me for that.
Hold on, did you post about it on your like?
No, on the podcast, yeah.
No, you didn't. That's brilliant.
Even this though, like I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know how to cook scrambled egg for a while, and also I didn't really know how to like crack eggs. So the other there's so many times where I just crack an egg and it would just I'd crack it too hard and it would just explode on the table, and then I'd have to scoop it up and then put it back into the pan with all the eggshell in it. Because we don't really take the time to do scrambled eggs. I just saw my flatmates do it and I was like, okay, how did you do that? And I just thought you just cracked. I first did it where I cracked multiple eggs in a pan and then I just tried to mix it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, these there are hidden curses of high IQ people that maybe you don't consider.
Yeah. And I want to carry out by saying that's not me and you like saying that we're fucking Einsteins and shit. Like that's not what we're trying to say. I just send you that study because I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that there are actually we can maybe extend this to a general point that there are things that society views as beneficial and like in its complete it's completely beneficial. Like people will see, oh, I wish I could have a higher IQ because that would be 100% good for my life. And it's like, well, there are always negatives to things. You know, I wish I was really, really, really good at this skill or this hobby or this sport, or I wish I was blessed in life with being born in a wealthy family, whatever it is. We have these traits, these characteristics, these circumstances that we desire and be like, that would be great. My life would be perfect if I just had this. And actually nothing, like I've said to you in previous podcast, nothing is 100% benefit. There is always costs on the other side of things. So yeah.
Tell me about these sort of spiritual sub-personality, this theory.
Yeah. So this is really interesting. This gripped me yesterday, and I wrote about it for a lot of time. So I'm going to get my notes out just in case I need them. I don't want to rely on them, but just in case I miss a bit, because I don't want to miss a bit. But basically, I've on a couple of podcasts now and different like psychology sources and philosophy sources. I've been hearing this idea that perhaps the best way to view our drives and our motivations in life is as their own sub-personalities, as their own spirits, as their own beings that possess us to behave in certain ways. So basically, let me explain what I mean by a drive. or a motivation. It can be very simple things like the drive to eat food when you're hungry, or the drive to go to sleep when you're tired, and things like anger is a sort of drive to change your environment when something frustrates you, or lust, a sort of sexual drive, or even positive things like enthusiasm is a drive to continue to do the thing you're doing, or love is a drive to spend time with those people that you love, etc., etc. These are drives, these are motivations. And I think they're best viewed as things that possess us, because when you are engaging, let's say, or when you are fulfilling a drive like anger, you do things that the conscious you, what you consider to be you, wouldn't ideally do in most circumstances. You do things you regret. You make irrational decisions. It's almost like that anger, that emotion, that drive possesses you, and then you're not in 100% in control anymore. You're then being driven to do that thing. You're being possessed by that spirit to act out that behavior and speak in a certain way, or behave in a certain way that's more aggressive, and more emotionally turbulent, right? And then that, to me, is so interesting, because then it was extended when I was listening to these podcasts. It was extended to say that these drives that we have also changed our worldview when we're gripped by them. Because let's take anger as an example. When you're angry, you can be really horrible to someone you love. And like the conscious you that you consider yourself to be most of the time would never wish to say or do anything like that to someone you truly love. But in the grips of anger, your perception and the way that you interact with reality changes. It's like that sub-personality has its own philosophy towards life. It has its own value structures. It has its own perspectives on things. And you're also possessed by those. And that's why there's this quote from Nietzsche where he says, "For every drive wants to be master, and it attempts to philosophize in that spirit." Every drive that we have has its own narrative, has its own philosophy that it wants us to adopt. So anger has the philosophy that this person, this circumstance did us wrong, and therefore we need to act in a to achieve revenge or redemption, or we need to change our environment as quick as possible, so we're aggressive or whatever. And then if this is true, and I'm not saying that anger is a spirit. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this is a good way of viewing it, to understand it. If this is true, if this is a good way to describe sort of these aspects of our psyche, then for me, many questions arise from that. Questions like, what is the role of consciousness then? Why has that come about? Because we're just possessed by these different emotions and drives in our lives. Why would we develop the ability to become conscious? How has that happened? And also, who and what and where is the self in all of this? Because if it's not you that possesses you when you sort of indulge in drives like anger and lust and enthusiasm and hunger and stuff, then who is the self? What is it? What's its purpose? And why is it sort of arose? And also, can we control which drives we indulge in more or less? Can we stunt that process as it begins? Can we feel ourselves being possessed by the spirit of anger or lust and stop ourselves? And can we promote certain positive spirits like enthusiasm, like adventure, like love? And then I have another bit that I want to add at the end, sort of that creates a religious connection to this, but I'll open up the floor just in a second for you. It's very, I love that. Well, I love when I find abstract ways of understanding something that somehow make it more digestible. Because I'm not talking in literal senses. I'm not saying that our drives are actual metaphysical spirits that possess us. But I'm saying that's what the experience feels like. And because it feels like that, how can this idea help us understand ourselves? So, yeah, what do you think?
I think when you're angry, you don't have control. The animal has control, and you see red. And something has triggered that anger, and when they do that, they put off energy. They put off this red energy towards you. and then you kind of suck it up, and it needs to come out of you again, and so that's how all these kind of things work together. It reminds me of when we used to speak about Ernest Becker's denial of death, and I think that would be a good point of answer. That what is the role of consciousness, and that is a separate thing to the animal, and I guess you can. I think I read something again from Nietzsche. It was this phrase called "fettered hearts, free spirits," and what that means is when you control your emotions, your emotional will, your mind is free and your spirit is free. And I think for me, there's this idea of like operationalizing happiness, of like where I think it's Hormoz's idea. Where you look at all your days and you take the top 10% that you were the happiest and that you got the most done or whatever. And for me, this fettered hearts, free spirits is that top 10% for me. It's where I don't have any desires that hold me back, and within that, I think the other side of the coin of desire is also fear. And so I think that top 10% would be not much fear, and overcame my desires or didn't give in to them, and maybe had some challenge along the way. So yeah, that's my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I like that. I think I've just sort of briefly skimmed through my notes again, and I want to address a couple of those questions that I then asked. And what I put here about the role of consciousness is it could be that what consciousness is the mediator, or like some sort of central awareness or processing software for these drives that is very specific to the human being. And maybe that's why we have developed so massively compared to the animal kingdom, because our depth of consciousness is something that differentiates us from the animal world. So what do I mean by a mediator? Well, the deeper the state of consciousness, the more aware you can become about how you're feeling and how you're acting. Now, it's kind of like through attention practices and mindfulness practices, you can notice when an emotion arises within you or a drive arises within you. You might then still act on it. You might then still act irrationally or suboptimally, but at least there's this greater like meta awareness of what's going on in your body and mind. And that is something as a human being you can definitely develop, right? And maybe human consciousness then has a unique ability of over time being able to develop some level of control, so you can reduce those drives that make your life worse when you're possessed by them, and promote the drives that are more beneficial through mindfulness, through awareness. And like I say, this is the one key difference between us and the animal world. An animal will have a drive like lust or hunger or fear to get away from a predator, and it will have to indulge in that motivation 100%. There is no way that a cat or a fox, when it sees the headlights of a car, can go, hold on, actually that's just a car, I don't have to run away from this, I can still sort of sit by the side of the road. No, they run away, because they have to indulge in the drive. Whereas a human being, we can do things like bungee jumping, where we're like, I'm going to be really scared here, but I'm going to overcome that and do it anyway because I've been told that it's safe, so my consciousness knows that it's safe, allegedly, and I'm going to go and have a thrill, and I want that adrenaline. It's interesting. And then my other question about, well, are there drives that we want to be possessed by and that we can promote? I think that's true. I think there are life-changing, meaningful, perhaps even divine drives that we can be possessed by and we can seek out in our lives. And I remember hearing Jordan Peterson say that a potential definition of God is the spirit that possesses you when you're on the right path. And if we make that less mystical and we go, Okay, instead of using the word spirit, can we use the word emotion or the drive, the sort of the feeling, the sensation, and the excuse me, the sensation, and the thought patterns and the emotional patterns when you do the right thing. That's what that's what the Holy Spirit is, right? And I think that the hero's journey, that idea that I've talked at length about on the podcast and stuff, is the life that you create when you are possessed by and you follow the spirit of adventure, the drive for adventure, the drive to explore the unknown, enthusiasm, right? Beauty, awe, the sublime, all these great things. And I think that's true. I think that's true. I think when I'm really invested in a piece of work, or I'm really gripped by my life and I really want to be alive and I want to be there, it's when I'm possessed by some sort of drive for adventure, or some sort of drive for enthusiasm and love and gratitude and beauty and awe. And just as a final point, I said about a religious connection, I then think, and this emerged in my brain as I was writing yesterday morning, that the kind of themes in religious texts and stories, this idea of evil and the devil, but also the divine, the Holy Spirit, the path of Christ, could these all just be symbolic representations and like narratives that represent different motivational drives in life that you can follow? Like when you do something immoral or out of anger or out of lust or out of resentment and pain, are you not possessed by the devil or evil in sort of symbolic terms? And equally then, when you do something good, when you have a level of self-sacrifice for the greater good, or you're kind to people, or you love people as you would, love yourself, or a good friend of yours, aren't you then just possessed by this spirit of community and gratitude and decency? And then it's sort of this another string to the bow of my theory that it's very early theory, but that religion may have emerged in some manner through human beings just trying to understand ourselves and our own psyche. We create stories, we create symbols, we create myths about ourselves. And like I think ideas like the devil and like the Holy Spirit are real. Just not in like this very clear metaphysical, metaphorical sense. No, that's not what it means. But there are sort of drives and motivations and feelings that do possess us, that are moral and immoral and beneficial and costly to our lives and the lives of others around us. So that was a bit of a long rant, but tell me what you think.
When you said the mind was like a mediator, I think that's a good way to phrase it. Kind of like a referee, kind of like a a thing that has control. Because say you're drinking too much and people around you say steady, and then you're like, come on, one more. You should, your mind should have the ability, when that energy comes in of wanting one more pint, you're able to take it in and then translate it into another energy. That would be best case scenario, really. Or you can give into it and then let that drive overcome you and take place. But yeah, that's the thing that's the point you really want to get to, is because that energy is going to come in, and you're gonna want another pint, but you've got to turn it into different energy, into maybe being charismatic for like a couple minutes, and then it goes away. You kind of got to distract yourself in a way. And your point about how these religious symbols are drives, I do agree with as well. I think there's this sort of underworld, sort of reptilian category of drives. There's I think they're called the Seven Deadly Sins, and
Yep.
they're all very they're all kind of the same thing. I looked into this a tiny bit, and it was that pride was the worst one because all the other six come from pride. when you think about it. So like the if you're which it sounds weird. Took a bit to get my head through that. Why is being proud of yourself a bad thing?
Mm.
Well, because if you're proud of yourself, then you're probably gonna put yourself on a pedestal to other people, which a lot of things come from. So you'll be lustful because you'll think things should just come to you, and think sort of women, and you earned all these women and things,
Mm.
and it's things like greed that you earned and that you should keep going. All these things come from pride, and this is just a category of drives. It's all the same thing, and the opposite side of this is a more righteous and decent set of characteristics. It's where the idea of a virtue comes from. These equilibriums that are between two things. How courage is between being too out there and too loud, and cowardice. It's these are kind of hyper true virtues, are sets of drives that we should aim for, because then they lead to better things.
Mm. Yeah, it really did hit me yesterday. I was like, wow, like to me, it becomes more and more clear the more I study this kind of stuff that religion is a way that human beings have articulated what it means to be in the world in a positive way. Now, yes, that religion's led to sort of conflict between human beings because we get ideologically captured and then believe that our belief system is superior to another's, and that's just the human ego getting involved, right? That just is how it is. It's just the ego. That's not religion's fault, in my opinion. But the core principle of Christianity, I guess, is the one that's sort of most dominant in my mind. Is like about love and about doing moral things and being in the correct way. And yes, it's going to be intoxicated with cultural norms at the time when these texts were written and the biases of that society. But generally, I just think somewhere along the line, our evolutionary history, we developed a consciousness, right, that differentiated us from the animal world, and it's tainted us with this divine capacity to come close or to understanding what's going on here, or even just question it. We have the ability to question what the hell's going on here. And from that, we needed somehow to scrape together some answers in this complex and incomprehensible universe. And so we started creating these symbols and these stories of what good humans did and what good humans were. And over time, over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we then get to religions, and not just religions, but mythological stories like we've talked about on the podcast before. Saint George and the Dragon, and even like simple, like very, what we consider to be pop culture things like children's films and TV shows and movies. They show us what it means to be a good human or what it means to be a bad human. That's why we love hero versus villain dynamics and all this kind of stuff. We've just, in a way, a lot of culture and media and all that is just trying to show humans what it means to be us. We're constantly trying to figure it out. We're constantly trying to do self-analysis and self-discovery, even if we don't realize that's what it is. Yeah, really, really interesting. I had another point as well that I've now forgotten. What else did you say?
I, I can talk a
Go
bit
on.
more, and you can maybe think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Just on that point, it's almost like it's it's crazy how advanced we are compared to the animal kingdom. I honestly believe the stone ape theory, and I feel like there was a load of monkeys, and they just found this mushroom plant, and then just kept eating it and kept eating it, and then eventually these monkeys all came together with a new state of consciousness, and were like, all right, well, what's good and what's evil? What are we going to stop people from doing? And they start asking these bigger questions, and then it sort of keeps spiraling into the human existence as it is now.
Mm, mm. And it's weird that we've been blessed with this skill of language to be able to articulate it and communicate it to each other. You know, it's not just divine inclinations in the mind. Somehow we've been able to write it down and narrativize it and create imagery and themes, and it's just it's deep, man. It's some of the deepest parts of human culture. That it's weird that the older I've got, just the more weird and religious and spiritual I've got, man. It's weird. It's like, God, it's just crazy. It's just, I think maybe I feel like my right hemisphere's flowering open, or like I'm just, the more I learn about psychology, the more religious I become, which sounds weird, but I feel like there is a link there. And I feel like that's why I love Carl Jung's work so much, because to me, he was the pioneer and the key figurehead in history that put psychology and spirituality together and found some sort of overlap between that. And I feel like my life's work that I want to create is in his footsteps, is in doing that. Yeah.
If you can't remember,
No, it's gone. So I think go on to your point about morality that you had on the document.
So I need to look into this more, because what I've kind of got is a scatterload of things from different philosophers right now, and I'm going to try and figure it out and make it digestible. So I've got a couple of theories of where sort of evil comes from within this idea of morality, and the first is from Kierkegaard, and he says that boredom is the root of all evil. Okay, so from a religious context, Adam and Eve kind of, I think one of the reasons Eve ate the forbidden fruit was because they were in this paradise garden and they were a bit bored. Then we've got things like maybe worldly examples of, well, why do you do things that you regret, like drunk texting an ex, or like even like haters in our comment section. They're all trying to. Evil is happening because they are bored. And
can I just jump in with a point with that, which I think just develops it, because I agree with you, but I feel like this sort of what's the word, emphasizes it, and I feel like it might have been Kierkegaard as well that's also said this, but he said, or maybe it was Dostoevsky. It might have been Dostoevsky, but they talked about how when life is so good, what humans look for is they look for limitation and they look for challenge. They look to create that. When they're bored, they look to create some sort of conflict for them to resolve, because we're like problem-solving beings. So like the Adam and Eve example, if they had more shit to do rather than just like frolic around in paradise and like be loved by God and interact with all the animals and all that, if they had problems to solve, then they probably wouldn't, they were less likely to be distracted by the serpent and get sort of possessed into indulging in the forbidden fruit. And in the same way, if people have shit to do in their lives, if they've got like a clear purpose to be striving towards and stuff that's meaningful to them, then are they going to get bored and then write hate comments on their Instagram? You know what I mean? But carry on.
yeah, like it's the Dostoevsky thing of, if the world was perfect, the first thing you do is start smashing things up to see some imperfection. It's exactly that.
Yeah.
Like Adam and Eve in the garden, they didn't even have jobs; they were just fucking about. They weren't even paying taxes.
Knocking about.
They're in paradise, just and well, I think back to kind of like my previous life of being in secondary school and messing about, and why was I doing that? Why did one day I go into year 8 drama class and then start burying my friend in loads of coats, and everyone so when we all sit down for the register, there's just with this one guy who emerges up and then disrupts the whole class and stops the register. But why did we do that? Well, because we were bored and we were trying to find some entertainment in that boredom. And we're stopping other people from learning, so that is kind of evil. Like, I think it's true that all evil comes from boredom. It's like, the way Kierkegaard phrased it was, boredom is the silent killer of the soul. And Dostoevsky talks about this a lot as well, with how self-destruction, this idea, it comes from people who think but don't act. and the action is what kind of cures the boredom. Imagine you just want this one person. These guys that they're everywhere in the UK. Like these guys that are just kind of spend their life thinking about the world and their past, but they don't actually act to make it better. Like I see these souls about, like it's just, it seems to be an English thing of the culture's set in its ways, so it's like you don't feel like you should act, and it's quite sad. But yeah, it's this boredom. I guess it's just the absence of stimulation, and we all want stimulation. And then a question is, well, what's the opposite side of this? Suffering. These things exist on a oscillation, as Schopenhauer said, and maybe suffering then is the root to all good, if boredom is the root to all evil. I mean, I think there's probably, I think everything that, all the great inventions and all the kind of human accomplishment has all come from suffering.
But suffering that's worthwhile. I think
voluntarily as well.
Probably. Yeah, like a suffering that you've approached voluntarily, but also that leads to the greater good, like a level of self-sacrifice now, so that in the medium and long term, you and your community and the world as a whole benefit. Yeah,
because there is some suffering that's like, I remember there was a girl in secondary school who set the fire alarm off before a test, and that was because she didn't want to go into the suffering of doing the test. So then she tried to escape out of it, and it was too much for her. So it's like, I don't know, that's some evil there that's been created and because of suffering.
I think we can change. I think suffering sounds extreme, because suffering, you under that umbrella of suffering is things like starvation and famine and war and things like that. I know what you're pointing at. To me, I think I'd phrase it more as like, we want challenge. We want problems to solve. On the other side of boredom is problems to solve. Because what's boredom? It's kind of like, well, there's nothing to do. There's no problem to solve. There's no challenge to overcome. You're just sort of drifting. Whereas what you want is you want stuff to do. You want stuff to engage in.
And I think it's people. I think the phrase of you shouldn't care what other people think about you because most people don't like themselves. I think the reason that most people don't like themselves, I mean, it's a pretty extreme phrase, to be honest.
But is it wrong?
Themselves, really? Like, that's like, okay, I'm looking at my street right now. That means, like, most of these people that I see on a daily basis don't actually like themselves. And whoa. Deep. I mean, is that because they don't have a problem to solve? And I think, yeah, probably that's probably the reason. I mean, I think there's just this worldview. I think it's their worldview that becomes self-destructive in the stories that they tell themselves. And to me, no, okay, I'll say that there's a guy on my group project, and he was saying about how he didn't really like himself, or he didn't have too much self-respect, and I dug into it a little bit, and it was because he didn't achieve anything. He hasn't achieved anything. So I think you need that. And
yeah, I have a point on that. From The Courage to Be Disliked, that book that I read recently, and it said that, and I think it's an important point to touch on, but also to develop just very briefly. Like the guy said in the book, because it's based on Adlerian philosophy and psychology, said that your sense of self-worth comes from how your reality reflects back to you on like what your worth is, and that's based on what you do and how you affect your community. And the important level of sophistication we have to go into in this point is we don't just mean, what grades have you got, how much salary do you earn, what car do you drive, what house do you own. That's material shit. Yes, you can get some self-worth from that if your ego wants to invest in that 100%. But he said in the book, and this was a really important point, was that it's less about achieving, because when that word has connotations of like material wealth and status and resources, it's more about contributing to the community around you. So if you're a really loving mother, father, sister, friend, brother, whatever, and you make somebody's experience better, they're going to want to be around you And in that energy of them wanting you in their existence, you're going to feel a level of self-worth from that, because you are worth something to the world. You are a benefit to the world. So when you say the guy might feel that way because he hasn't achieved much, that could be, yeah, like go and like do something productive and constructive in some sort of like academic world or in a job or whatever. But it also can be like the love you share with your family members and your friends, and the connection you provide people, and the sort of support you give them in the social world. That's also a source of esteem and worth as well.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Before I go into the second theory, I remembered something from when we were talking about how IQ people struggle with have high rates of depression, and this phrase here: "An intelligent man never becomes anything. It is the fool that becomes anything." Mainly because intelligence creates doubt, and
And like an over-analysis paralysis. Do you know what I mean? Overthinking. I think how much stuff, and I reflect on it in my own life, and like in the people that are close to me, how much do we not do because we just overthink our way out of it? You know what I mean? The fool doesn't do that. The fool just executes and fails publicly and doesn't care.
yeah, yeah, and I think one of the big problems today is that a lot of happiness is derived from creating envy of others rather than experience for yourself, and yeah, it's very external rather than internal, and then therefore you're kind of just creating evil by trying to make other people envious. But yeah, this is Socrates' point of where evil comes from. So Socrates thought that all evil came from knowledge. All evil came from ignorance. Sorry. So kind of the opposite point, and because basically no one desires to injure themselves, like hence all evil was done kind of unwittingly without knowledge, and because you wouldn't, if you knew that you were going to do something, and because when the idea assumes that when you do evil, it harms the person that's going to commit it. So if I murder someone, some in some form is going to come back and bite me. So and so the general public tends to equate morality with practicality. So if something brings pain, it's bad. But if something brings pleasure, it's good. But then that's your own definition of pain and pleasure, which, like this way of thinking, it kind of ignores like ethical considerations of virtue. And so the good man who has knowledge will not yet and compete with. Okay, this is a phrase I've got to read out properly. This is a couple lines. The good man who has knowledge will not yet and compete with his like, but only with his opposite. For example, doctors don't compete with each other, but they try and outdo the layman. The layman's just like a sort of a doctor without expertise, while the bad and ignorant will try and compete with both the like and the opposite. And I think that's very true, because the people at the bottom, they're always spending time, they're the ones without the knowledge that are always kind of fighting, always sort of distracting in drama and stuff, whereas the people at the top, they seem to work together a little bit more. And it's this, yeah, it's the possessing of, maybe to be honest, like on the drive point, maybe it's like the knowledge of kind of controlling your animal that stops you from doing evil.
Like I said, that depth of consciousness, like that mindfulness, there's such like it's another one of those meta skills that we talked about in the previous episode of like the social skills you can develop from like Robert Greene's work and stuff. There are meta skills that help you navigate life, and I think mindfulness and attention is one of those as well.
Yeah, these intangibles. And then sort of finally to finish off, I guess. So that's a couple of theories on where evil comes from. Now you've got to decide what evil actually is, because it's actually quite a difficult question. So Nietzsche says something about how evil kind of changed with the times. Morality changes with times. So, for example, slavery today is wrong. Couple what 100 years ago, it was okay. And so, if that's true, then this whole collective ideal of psychedelics is bad. Why should we listen to it? Like, if in 100 years, it's probably going to be well, I don't know. Let's assume that if in 100 years it's going to be legal because the collective thinks so, then like why should we listen to what's ever going along in this objective thing of what is good and evil? And so, I think then you think, okay, well, it's up to the individual then. And the only thing about the objective theory that I do like that I should point out is Kant has this idea. Immanuel Kant, he's quite a difficult philosopher to read. He has this idea of the categorical imperative, which is these absolutes of thou shalt not murder, things like that. There are absolutes morality where this thing is not right. And the thing where I agree with that is that I think a categorical imperative does exist. If there is an existence of God, then there are things that are going to be good, like ultimate goods. There's going to be a theory of forms. Like there's going to be, in every situation, there is a certain thing that exists that is good, absolute good. But then who decides? But because we don't have that, because we kind of just assume through the Bible and things like that, we just kind of guess it. And so Kant's theory is difficult because, thou shalt not murder, but what if you're guarding Anne Frank and some guy's trying to come kill Anne Frank and you got to self-defend and defend yourself? So morality is really not this, I do need to read more into it, but it's not this concrete thing. And yeah, I think I most align with relativism, which is the thought that it depends on the situation. It's kind of an easy one to opt out in to say that I believe in, but yeah.
It's a weird one because I think like all these really complicated questions, and it's obviously a complicated question because across hundreds of years, so many philosophers have posited different ideas into the sort of debate. But with these questions, the answer is always a bit of both. The answer is always, well, there are some concrete truths of morality, but then there is so much around that is culturally constructed and open to interpretation. That point about slavery is so interesting because, like, it's so true. Like hundreds of years ago, there were people like me and you, Jacob. Right? They're more similar to me and you than they're different in so many ways. Thought that was okay. And nothing about the objective practice of doing that thing has changed. But what's changed is the cultural idea of what's okay and what's not. And it's so clear to us at the core of our being that that's not okay. But then our ancestors 300 years ago would say different. And there's not a lot of difference between me and you and our ancestors 300 years ago on a very basic level. And then you do question, you go, well, what things these days do we think is okay that in 200 years' time, there's going to be Joels and Jacobs in our ancestral sort of future that they think is not okay? It's really interesting. How is that going to evolve across time? And then the other point that I wrote down as you were talking was about Socrates' idea of ignorance. And this quote, I can't remember whose quote it was, but it was something, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something along the lines of most things that we consider evil can be attributed to stupidity rather than malevolence. A sort of a lack of awareness. No, it's very rare that people do something purely because they want to be evil. And you can even push that to the extremes and go, well, even someone like Adolf Hitler, who is like universally considered to be a bad guy because he did some horrific things, he led to the death of millions and millions of innocent people. he thought he was doing something good for humanity. He did, right? He thought he was cleansing Germany and sort of he thought he was doing good for his people and his society because of his huge like irrational discriminatory like beliefs and prejudices of another sort of class of people, another community of people. But he thought he was doing something good, which is, you can't even conceptualize that. But it's true. He did, and you can think about that with many people that do evil things from a small scale to a larger scale. So I think it's very rare you find somebody who goes, "I want to destroy some good in the world." There are definitely those people do exist, of course, but that quote of like a lot of I think it's helpful on a mundane everyday level for me and you and the people listening to this, that the things that annoy us that people seem to do wrong, right? Not great acts of evil, but like, that person cuts you up at the junction in traffic, or that person says something unkind to you, or whatever. These little acts of small immoralities are actually probably just due to their lack of awareness and stupidity, in inverted commas, rather than them actually setting out to be evil or malevolent towards you.
Yeah, it's I think Robert Greene says that a stupid man is more dangerous than a wise man, because they're going to be the ones that does the action. I think, yeah, that the Hitler example is interesting. It's like it was Hitler's opinion that what he did with Nazi Germany was good, and it's just it's yeah, maybe we do have an opinion of what's good and evil, but our opinion should be given a second question, like what's
that's a very useful aspect of culture and society, isn't it? We are not just individuals. Our views of the world are very molded by the social world. If I started believing a very irrational, dangerous thing, and I spoke about it on the podcast, I'd like to think you would go, "Hold on, Joel, what the fuck are you doing?" But no one turned to Hitler and went, "Hold on, what the fuck are you doing?" Like that kind of the atrocity that occurred there was his irrational and discriminatory and sort of, I don't know, horrific view of the world, but also everyone else around him conforming to it and sort of allowing that ideological seed to grow. Yeah, it's crazy.
Maybe it was a drive though. Like maybe he got rejected from art school and then just wanted revenge on the world.
Who knows, man? And I think also that's why studying history is so crucial for psychology and understanding our own nature as human beings, because I can't stress enough how this is a scary realization to come to, but it's also very profound, that Hitler is a human being just like me and you, Jacob. Yes, we can never conceptualize ourselves doing anything that evil or thinking anything that evil, because we're not those kind of people. That our sense of self and our reality sort of posits that to us. But he had a brain like we do. He had a body like we do. He had drives like we did. We do. Sorry. He grew up and he had family connections. He probably had friends, and he was probably a weird guy, psychopathic tendencies, all that kind of shit. But one thing led to another, and just like me and you, he was a human being that had his own beliefs and insecurities and confusions and emotions, and he did a horrific thing, and he affected millions of people's lives in a negative way. But he's a human like me and you, which is just like, it's terrifying, because it shows the capacity for a human being to how malleable we are. It's by circumstance, by belief systems, whatever, to do horrific things. And then it's like, well, actually, okay, that's a scary way of thinking about it. But also you can flip that on its head and go, well, if the human being is that malleable to do bad, is he or she also malleable enough to do good? How can you develop certain belief systems and behavior patterns to then affect the world in a hugely positive way? Because I think that's really
if me or you got really angry, we just punch a wall. But if Hitler got really angry, he'd just gas loads of Jews.
Well, I don't know if that's how it works, but yeah, I get what you mean.
But like the same thing of like we're a human, but we exist in such different worlds, and like you can't comprehend the leader of a country who is out there trying to take over the world, like that they're the same as you. They they still like like Putin still like reads like YouTube comments and like still like take showers and things.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's why I think that's why when I think when one of the first introductory lectures in Peterson's Maps of Meaning series, he says something so powerful that I think about, like that recurs in my mind months later, which is he said that most of you in class would probably think that if you were in Germany in the 1940s, that you'd be one of the few people that were rebelling against the regime and sort of formed underground networks to try and save people and do good. But he said, statistically, most of you would be on the side of the Nazis. Most of you might, some of you might even be concentration camp prison guards. And like that as a message is just like, God, it's it's mind-bogglingly scary but true. And that's why, and he also went on to say, like, that's why you study history, because studying history, you're studying yourself, you're studying your capacity. And Jung said you can't really be truly good until you understand deeply your capacity for evil. You understand and integrate your shadow, you know,
But
the parts of yourself.
what does that look like practically?
I mean, it's not necessarily a practical thing you go out and do in the world, but it's a reflection point, and you go, well, I can do horrible things, but I also can do good things. But until you understand that you have the same biological makeup as your ancestors that did terrible things, you understand that that's not necessarily in you as an individual for potential, but in a human being as potential. You need to understand that before you can truly be a moral person.
Yeah, to be fair, I think you have to like understand the suffering of others to go out and create something that is valuable for them. I think you have to understand how actually people suffer. To be fair, to then be appreciative and grateful and do good. Yeah. Do we have time for a final point for your last one about the
Yeah,
true reality in the material world?
yeah, man. Like I'll put this in real world examples, and then I'll go a bit abstract like usual. But yesterday the sun was shining. I had quite a free afternoon, and I just sat in the sun and read and listened to like classical music for like 2 hours, and it was so nice. It was like the first time in multiple weeks that I've actually just stopped and not been traveling anywhere, not been thinking about a basketball game, not been training, not been stimulated, and I was just able to be in nature, listening to the birds, listening to the beautiful music, reading something that I was interested about, and just sort of basking in that sunlight. And a thought came to me, and the thought was, and I think this is an idea that's sort of built upon many of the things we've discussed in previous episodes, but there exists a true reality that is fundamentally good. One of love, one of art, one of beauty, one of poetry, one of metaphor and music and dance and adventure and mysticism and ego dissolution and unconditional joy and peace. And that we can connect with this reality when we're in the right state of consciousness. It's the sublime that the Romantic poets talked about, in the 17 and 1800s. It's the mental place that psychedelics make easier for us to access. And for a brief moment, we are in contact with that true reality. It's the world of the right hemisphere. And I think the usual ethos and energy of the material world and the tasks that I have to go and engage in that, whether that's basketball or uni or whatever, is fundamentally opposing to this true reality. It's grounded in ego dynamics and status and competition rather than unconditional love and beauty and art. And I think I struggle with that because there's a part of me that wants to just bask in this true reality as much as I possibly can. Be a philosopher and an artist and come into contact with the most magnificent, awe-inspiring parts of the world, the sunsets, the the mountain ranges. I don't know. Sometimes I read when I read poetry or listen to a beautiful piece of music, I become possessed by this joyful, like light feeling in my body and in my soul. And I find that grappling between those two of like needing to be a person out in the world and do stuff to earn money and sort of survive, but also wanting to be in this sort of spiritual world. And maybe we're back at this dichotomy of the drill sergeant versus the Alan Watts character, or the left hemisphere versus the right hemisphere. And I think about it when I read Carl Jung's autobiography. He talked about his worldly self, the boy, the young man, the adult who had to hold down a job and earn money and pay taxes and buy houses and shit. But then he had this second personality that was within him. It was a spirit that he felt like had been here before and would be here after him, and a spirit that understood fundamental truths about reality but couldn't quite communicate it to the worldly self in the way that he can understand. And I relate to that so much, and I think you will too, just from hearing what I'm saying. That's why we're friends, because me and you have both, in small ways, in separate ways, we've both sort of come into contact with this true reality. And I think it exists as kind of a meta layer over everything else, and you can tap into it in the right state of mind, but it's difficult, and it's something to sort of train and really focus on. And I think that's something that spiritual, religious people are always also trying to get at. This, kingdom of heaven is a place on earth. It's a mental state on earth. It's a way of seeing and interacting with the world, and it's very difficult to maintain across time, because we do have an ego, and there are things we have to do out in the world, and you do have to acquire resources, and you do have to be in competition with others. But I think knowing that this true reality exists, and knowing the doors of perception that can lead you there, like poetry and music and metaphor and psychedelic experience and meditation, is useful to sort of provide some real like meaning and joy, and create beauty in your life in amidst all the difficulty and problems that we need to solve.
I think I think it's like both of these worlds are kind of exist at the same time. In that when I go out now, I will see both a little bit of the beauty and love from the higher form, but also the material shallowness of the material form. And I think it's our choice as people to pick apart which one we want to live in. And I think it kind of it's almost like how we approach the world is how we approach people, in that there exists spaces between us and people, and between how close we are to how far away we are to other people. In the same way that there exists how close we are to the world to how far away we are from the true world. And if we assume, okay, there exists spaces between us and people, well, what is that space? Well, it's the masks and the layers of depth that you haven't been able to reach. And so how do you get past that? Well, there's a couple of things you can do, and there's a couple of things you can make them do. And a couple of things you can do are to be vulnerable, to be relatable, to try and go deeper, go past those layers intentionally by asking questions. And a couple of things that you can do for them is to make them feel important, make them feel appreciated, interesting. And what happens is I think there's kind of like a thickness and a thinness to this space, in that when you try and pursue depth and the person there turns it away, the space between you both gets thinner. And so then you're only relying on, when you've built up this, known someone for 2 years, but you can't get through that last bit of depth that you really want to, there still have quite a long length of the space, because there's all the memories that you've accumulated. It's very thin. It doesn't give you much room for anything new or exciting. And so this, I think, is similar to the world in that I think you need to kind of like really approach it head on and be present and make sure that you're seeing what's really there, that you're not just looking at it and you're blinded by the assumptions that you tell yourself. I don't have as good an analogy as I do for the world as I did the space between people, but yeah, I think there's some sort of thing, some sort of truth there.
Well, the thought that came to me as you were speaking is, if we could maybe boil down everything that a human being wants down to one word, I think not a bad shout to put in there would be connection. We want to be connected to ourselves, we want to be connected to others, and we want to be connected to the world. And when I say the world, I think what I mean is that true reality. You know, that the beauty of nature and the world as it is in its raw form, the sublime, as the Romantic poets talked about. And we're looking to try and connect and feel connected to ourselves, others, and the world, and feel that love and feel that pure, unrestrained, unconditional love. You know, and I just want to read two quotes, which is maybe a point where I'm happy to sort of close up this conversation. And these are quotes from Campbell, the sort of philosopher / psychologist that really articulated the hero's journey theory. And he said that people say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for our lives, but I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that our life experiences on the purely physical plane will have resonances within our own innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. He also said, I don't know what being is, and I don't know what consciousness is, but I know what bliss is. That deep sense of being present, of doing what you absolutely must do to be yourself. If you can hang on to that, you are on the edge of the transcendent reality. I think that's true. You know, being connected to the present moment, connected to what you do, connected to your loved ones, connected to the world around you. And that's when you can create, you know, heaven on earth. The kingdom of heaven can be yours. It can be a mental place that you exist in, and you know, and it can inform how you perceive and interact with the world. And you know, it's obviously all easier said than done on a random podcast on a Wednesday morning, but it's a worthwhile thing, I think, to try and get close to this philosophy in the way you approach your life in the world.
We try and create connection through technology, but that's kind of fake connection. Go for the real stuff. Thanks everyone for listening. If you could leave us a 5-star review, well, actually, leave a review of however you feel. Any reviews are good. So if you could do that if you enjoyed this episode, thank you very much.